That's like 10 seconds. Oh, there we go. All right, good evening. It is 7 o'clock on Thursday, January 26, 2023, and I am calling the Lunenburg Finance Committee to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the public meeting webinar. Or from a telephone, dial the toll-free number 888-475-4499 and enter webinar ID 792-737-0353. The agenda lists all topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions, and as we have one member who is joining us over Zoom, they will be a roll call vote. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any announcements from any of the committee members tonight? Excellent. Hearing none. Is there any public comment from the public? All right, seeing none, moving on. Any public comment from the committee at all? Perfect. Madam Town Manager, do you have a report before your presentation? You want to just go right to the presentation? Works for me. Do you know if Karen's joining us tonight at all? Okay. Let me pull up the presentation. All right, whenever you're ready.
I'm just going to turn the sound so you don't hear my emails coming in. All right, good evening, everyone. So tonight is the presentation on the fiscal 24 capital plan and a review of looking out beyond that, 10 years. So I'll start off as what qualifies as a capital project. The town's policy on capital expenditures, which is Financial Policy Section 3.02, defines capital projects as items that cost $20,000 or more and have a useful life of 3 years or longer. The Massachusetts Association of Town Finance Committees defines capital projects as major, non-recurring expenditures for one of the following purposes: acquisition of land for a public purpose, construction of a new facility, or external expansion or major rehabilitation of an existing one, such as public buildings, water and sewer lines, roads, and playing fields. Any planning, feasibility, engineering, or design study related to capital project or capital improvement program consisting of individual projects. Equipment for public improvements when they are first constructed, such as furniture, office equipment, or playground equipment, or major equipment which is expensive and has a relatively long life, such as fire apparatus, garbage trucks, and construction equipment. So let's look at the process. The Capital Planning Committee creates a capital plan that consists of all capital requests submitted by each town department for the next 10 fiscal years. The Capital Planning Committee's first meeting to begin the fiscal 24 capital process was on August 3rd. The capital planning documents were sent to departments in September, and the Capital Planning Committee met with departments from late October until the end of November. This year, the town manager transitioned the forms from the same software used for budgeting, which is the ClearGov platform we use. And all departments were submitting information through this platform. The data collected is based on the UMass Collins Center capital planning documents. That includes various categories such as effectiveness of government, the effect on the operating costs, effect on revenues, whether the project is mandated by the state or federal government, whether grant funds are available, how the project contributes to such things as economic growth, public safety, public health, and education. The new category was added this year, whether it also is a preliminary planning phase. Each category receives a rating and an overall score based on the aggregate score of all the categories. The higher the rating, the higher the priority. The Capital Planning Committee evaluates capital requests based on the responses to these categories. And as a group, the Capital Planning Committee reviews the merits of each of the projects. Each member submits their ranking of each project, and these are averaged to achieve a composite ranking. The Capital Planning Committee prioritized 29 capital project requests for fiscal '24 and provided this list to me on December 28th. The town manager may modify this list of capital projects as part of the proposed budget for the next fiscal year, and this is presented at annual town meeting and is either amended to reflect the will of the town meeting and voted on. This plan reflects the same projects that the Capital Planning Committee provided, with some differences in prioritization of some of the projects. So looking at fiscal '24, there were a total of 29 requests, totaling $2,941,010. And for facilities and grounds, that break down $635,000. For the fire department, it was $748,510. For public works, it was $648,000. And the school department was $909,500. By category, 1% of the requests were infrastructure, 21% of the requests for public works, 22% of the requests for town facilities, 25% of the requests for fire department, and 31% for school department. So the recommendation tonight for the preliminary capital plan is for 6 projects, totaling $1,360,500. I'll go through each of the 6 projects. The first priority, and I want to add that all 6 projects were the top 6 priorities of both the Capital Planning Committee and myself. And the first priority was for the replacement of Rescue 1 for $506,000. This project is to replace the 2014 ambulance. Based on maintenance costs, wear and tear of the current ambulance, and increased use, the lifespan is projected at 10 years. The average delivery time is currently near 2 years from time of order. The ambulance is at its reasonable lifespan. The replacement will increase efficiencies and effectiveness, reduce potential liabilities, contributes to public safety and the public health and well-being of the community. The priority number 2 project is for the Turkey Hill Elementary exterior door upgrades replacement for $160,000. This request is for the installation of a new vestibule that will require visitors to be buzzed in through 2 sets of doors to create a more enhanced, reliable security. Door replacement must be done before the access control upgrade. The current doors are over their reasonable lifespan. The project will reduce liabilities and threats, adds and expands customer service, and contributes to public safety and aesthetics. The third priority is for the Turkey Hill Elementary School security upgrades for $131,000. This request is to upgrade the door access controls and alarm keypad to match the same system at the middle school, high school. This will eliminate passcodes and replace access cards. Additional security cameras would be added at all exterior doors, other interior areas, and the playground area. And then it'd also add additional motion detectors. This equipment is at its reasonable lifespan. The project increases effectiveness and efficiencies, reduces potential liabilities and threats, adds and expands customer service, and contributes to education and public safety. The fourth priority is for the primary school security upgrades for $83,500. And this, it mirrors the Turkey Hill security upgrades as far as the work to be done and all the contributing factors of effectiveness and efficiencies, potential liabilities, threats as customer service, and contributes to education and public safety. The fifth priority is for the DPW to replace the six-wheel dump spreader plow truck, which is $240,000. This is for a new six-wheel dump truck to replace the unusable 2008 International six-wheel dump truck, which has a blown motor and is decommissioned. This vehicle is over its reasonable lifespan, and replacing it would increase effectiveness and efficiencies, reduce potential liabilities, decrease costs if replaced, and would contribute to public safety. Number 6 is to replace second six-wheel dump truck spreader and plow for $240,000. This is to replace the 2006 International six-wheel dump spreader, plow, and truck, which is in poor condition and is decommissioned. And for same reasons, it's over its reasonable life. Replacing it would increase effectiveness and efficiencies, reduce potential liabilities and threats, decrease costs if replaced, and would contribute to public safety. So looking at the capital requests that were not included in the preliminary recommendation, there are a total of 23 projects totaling $1,580,510. The current plan is funded through a combination of tax revenue, unexpended capital that is known at this time, and the special purpose stabilization account. My recommendation at this point in time, due to the unknown picture of how much we will need to carry in our overlay account at the annual town meeting for abatements, is to reserve all our free cash at this point and use these funding sources at this time. But as we move forward in the budget development progress and more information is known, we can look at possibly amending the appropriation where the funding sources are going to be.
What do we currently have in free cash?
$2,860,000, I think.
Okay.
So looking at, I had a slide on when the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund was established. So at the May 6, 2017 annual town meeting, the Special Purpose Stabilization Account was created. We've been able to build this fund up to $1,912,808. And if the recommended funding sources do not change between now and annual town meeting, and we use this as the $986,000 towards the fiscal 24 capital plan, the balance would be $926,808. Looking ahead at our future years, all these slides are more just for demonstration. They're not very legible, but I have included a link to the full 10-year request plan by department. So that's in the slide deck as well, if you wanted to look a more thorough look at outgoing years. This slide demonstrates that very top portion.
Keep going.
Yep, keep
Okay.
going.
There's the link. There we go.
One more. The totals for each of the 10 years. So you can see just kind of a pattern and where certain years are higher than others in requests. So our 5-year average expenditure on capital is $1.62 million, and 3-year average is $1.63 million. And given that there are capital project requests totaling $35.47 million at this point in time for the next 10 years, and if our funding remains consistent, we will not be funding approximately $19.5 million in capital request. And that bottom table demonstrates the 5-year and 3-year average on spending on capital. For next steps, my recommendation would be to reevaluate the fiscal '24 capital plan from now until town meeting to see if any additional funding can go towards the capital projects that are not funded at this time or recommended to be funded, and revisit the funding sources if free cash is available to be appropriated. We would continue to plan on using the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund in future years when there is large vehicle equipment needs, unless there are sufficient funds in other regular sources of raise and appropriation, free cash, and unexpended capital. The decisions on the future of Turkey Hill, TCP, and the involved space uses there are still critical to impact on capital planning and debt planning. So those are things I think we need to continue to discuss and look at various scenarios in debt planning for those projects as the information becomes more clear. And that's all I have.
Excellent.
Any questions?
I'll open it up to committee. Anyone have questions first?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
Madam Town Manager. I'm back on the 6 projects, and just could you walk through a little bit the funding sources and provide maybe a little more color on the amount coming from the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund, none from free cash, et cetera? Could you just go over that logic again?
Yes. So at this point, not knowing what we will need to appropriate at town meeting for the overlay, my recommendation would be to reserve our free cash for that until we have a better picture of what we need. And typically we use free cash towards our capital plan. But we do have the Special Purpose Stabilization Account that we have not tapped into yet, which there are large vehicle and equipment recommendations as part of this plan, which include Rescue 1 and the 2 DPW 6-wheel dump trucks. So those together, those 3 items combined are $986,000.
I see. And so, if I understand, so we're just waiting for the budget to come together to see what potential free cash might be available?
We have a certified free cash amount that we typically expend at annual town meeting. And typically, there's a portion of that designated towards capital, as well as other purposes. The regular stabilization fund, we've deposited money into the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund, the OPEB trust fund, and the capital plan. But at this point, that is a large unknown, so I would reserve making a recommendation on those funds at this time.
Okay, so the ultimate funding of this is still to be determined. Is that correct?
Correct. Well,
Okay.
Tonight, this is my preliminary recommendation.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it possible to ask before the tax assessments went out, how many projects were actually on the list? Was it always 6?
That wasn't, the list wasn't finalized at that
Okay.
point.
I'm kind of thinking going back with what was presented in late November, early December to the select board about what would be appropriated and what not. Does that fall and does that change any of the numbers here? Or could it change any of the numbers if that's?
That, the budget priorities discussion that you're talking about, I think we only discussed like the operating budget, that meeting.
Okay. So
Maybe, that point, 600,000 might have been earmarked within the operating budget for capital. And this uses 356,789 of that. So, but the next project in line, there wouldn't be a sufficient amount of funding
Right.
for that balance.
Okay. So at this point, there is no plan to potentially increase the number of projects that are funded?
At this moment,
Okay. Is there a way you could see that happening at all?
it will be determined by, as we get a clearer picture of what we need
Okay.
for the overlay.
Okay. And I assume that if there is anything else that is approved, it will be just sort of in the order that you have it listed, correct? So it would be
Correct, right.
immediately into the alarm system for Turkey Hill?
Yes, all the projects are in a prioritized list. So it would be as funding becomes available to go down that prioritized list.
Okay. I suppose the reason for asking is for that exact number 7, the Turkey Hill upgrade to the fire alarm systems. I sort of wonder, I mean, we have one dump truck, and I guess my question is it not concerning to put that higher? Should we not be more concerned about that? Or is it not that, is it just sort of an implemental upgrade, or is the system working well enough at this point?
Based on the, and you have 2 school committee members here tonight as well, and they can verify this. But that, and I can pull up the presentation as well. These projects, at least in my prioritized list, mirror the prioritization of the school, with the exception of the 3 millimeter, the window safety film. That was number 1 on their list in present.
Okay. I just, maybe the school committee can comment, is just, my concern is, is the fire alarm system working at Turkey Hill?
Peter Beardmore, 282 Pleasant Street. I'm a member of the school committee and a member of the capital planning committee, and I've spent quite a bit of time on all of these items. The fire alarm system at Turkey Hill is one of many infrastructure systems at Turkey Hill that date back to the late 1960s when that building was first constructed. And it has been upgraded piecemeal over time, certain aspects, detectors, sprinklers, those kinds of things over time, but it's never gotten a full system upgrade. And over time, a system like that really needs to be a complete system. We had a failure the first week of school, right around that first week of September, that the control board basically went out. To the point that we literally had a fire watch at the building, staffed by custodians over the course of Labor Day weekend. And when you have a failure of a system like that, where the master system, the overall system, is completely out of date, and there are basically no replacement parts for most of the system as it's been described to me, you could find yourself in a situation where you're hosed and you can't fix it. We got lucky. We found a new old stock control panel, and within a matter of several days, and it's been explained to me that this is sort of a 1 in 100 kind of scenario, we got the system back up and running. Credit to our facilities folks for figuring this thing out. The concern with that system is that if we were to run into another failure of this 60-ish year-old system, and by the way, this is one of several infrastructure systems in that building that are quite old, that we may not be as lucky, and that there could be a serious impact to operations. So this really comes down to risk planning, and it's number 7 on the priorities list for a good reason. Not 20 some odd items. It's a high priority item, but it is functioning now, to answer your question. And there's no immediate sign of failure, but it's a 60-odd-year-old system.
Was there immediate sign of failure in September?
50-odd-year-old system, excuse me, I've been misspoken here. No, I don't know the answer to that. I completely unqualified.
I suppose my point here is that we have 2 dump trucks at 240K. And that's great. We desperately need them, I'm sure. But for 47K more, which I'm sure in a 2.8 million free cash stash and a 1.9 million special stabilization fund stash, it's surprising to me that we would move a fire alarm system for an elementary school below a second dump truck for the town.
So there's a lot unspoken tonight
Yep.
with respect to this capital plan, Mr. Chairman, and I could probably go on here for an hour. Part of what was unspoken is what's happening with our highway department trucks. We have a sort of authorized inventory, or we normally run with 6 of these 6-wheeled trucks, if I'm correct, Madam Town Manager. Okay. I believe we have 2 on the road right now. So what you have not seen as part of this capital plan is replacements for the ones that went down this year. There's going to be 2 more next year on the capital plan, I believe, is probably what's on your 10-year plan, or pretty close in. We're in a really bad way with those trucks. Now, you could argue, and I have not seen a financial analysis of outsourcing everything, right? And that is a potential, scenario. But as has been discussed at this committee in the past, we have a full-time staff, and they really need the equipment to do the job. And they do obviously extraordinary work, and you all follow social media, you're aware of the long hours and the crazy work that they do. They really need the equipment to do the job, and right now they are really under where they should be with respect to. And so what a lot of us did, and the discussion that happened in the latter capital planning meetings, was all about prioritization and safety, right? There's a very good reason why we have an ambulance at number 1. There's a very good reason why we've got physical security stuff at the elementary school at number 2 and 3, and we viewed, and those 2 trucks are actually number 2 and 3 on my priorities list. We viewed that as safety equipment because they directly contribute to the safety of our roads, particularly this time of year. There are no good answers to the dilemma that we're in right now. But I think your questions are very well reasoned.
I appreciate that, and that honestly makes it a lot more understandable for me as well, is that seeing 2 of something is like, great, why do we need 2 of something?
Yeah,
But if we only
because
have
we need
2,
4.
that makes a big difference. And also, a potential risk is different than a consistent risk that we're actually dealing with.
Precisely.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple other questions for you. And this actually may be for the school committee as well. Is there a sort of a contingency plan for if we do have a system failure on the, no, I'm seeing lots of shaking heads. Okay. Do we have the ability to, does the select board have the authority to cover that if we need to replace it in the middle of the school year? What happens if it does fail in, say,
So there's
Mid-May.
the reserve fund, but that fund's capped at 75,000.
right? So just for sort of our own education, what happens at that point if we have an alarm system or a fire alarm system that dies in the middle of the year, but we have not appropriated the money to replace it?
That's a question, I think, for, I don't know if the school committee has discussed that, or, okay. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
qualified to answer that.
Could we have, use the building if we didn't have that? No, so
Right.
the answer is we gotta get it, right? So the question is, if it happens, we probably should think about having a contingency plan for that if it does, if we think it will. Like any organization, you just have to do that.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's exactly what I'm getting at. It's great that we have the upgrades coming for security, but security upgrades don't help us if we can't use the building.
Right now, there's ARPA funding, but that would be a determination made
select
by
board,
the
right.
select board.
Right, okay. But at this point, we don't have, there's nothing that we can just outright transfer without town meeting approval.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay. Any other questions for the town manager on any of these? Tom, did you have a chance to look it over?
I did.
Okay.
Beforehand. I don't know what we had talked about. I just,
Mostly just where the funding was coming from.
I guess just one other question for me. So this is, you provided the 5-year and the 3-year average of 1.62, I think it was 61. And we're stopping at 1.36 million. Is there a reason we're not spending more?
On average, you're saying?
Yeah, you said on average, the calculation is we spend 1.6 million a year on the capital plan, and this one is 1.36, so, 260,000 less. Is there a reason that we stopped at the 1.36 million?
Funding. But like, at this point, like I said, with the unknowns of free cash, because
Okay,
we typically would use free cash.
okay. So you could increase the amount of projects here, is that true?
If, when we have a more clear picture on what free cash will be needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
The differential between the 35-ish million and the 19-ish million for the 10-year plan, is there any, I guess, plan to address that differential? I mean, that's a massive differential for what we're hoping to do and what we're able to do.
Well, a large portion of that are related to Turkey Hill, and some of it, the TC Passios. So like I said, knowing what we're going to do with those two facilities will help with debt planning, because those two projects would most likely be debt planning, depending on how much there are. Obviously, Turkey Hill would be, but
Do you know by any chance offhand roughly what percentage of that is incorporated by TCP or Turkey Hill?
I think Turkey Hill in the 10-year plan was around 14.5 million.
Okay,
And I think TCP, the abatement part of the million was included in the 10-year plan. But there are other related costs depending on what we do with the, say, if the roof, the HVAC system, the electrical system, those are
so we're
not.
talking a minimum of 15 million to add on to that 20-ish million. In
No,
theory-
that's
well, we could in theory
that's
remove that
inclusive.
if the municipal building design committee decided to do something, we would effectively remove that 15 million from the capital plan, and that would,
It's still money we'd be spending on capital.
right,
But it would be looking at our debt policy and determining when we're taking on that debt and how it fits in
okay,
there.
okay. Any other questions? Mr. Simeoni, any questions?
Not at this time. I'm still absorbing this.
Sounds good, all right.
Okay.
That was an easy one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let me stop sharing. There we go. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is aware of the tax assessment situation that's going on. And if not, I'll just do a very brief recap. Tax bills went out at the beginning of the year, and those living around the lake areas, Hickory Hills, some on Lake Wallum, and Lake Shirley as well, saw a decent number of them had large increases in their land assessment values of upwards of 150% increase. Versus the rest of the town that saw, I believe, an average of around 20% increase overall. So I realize that the select board is running an investigation into this, that it is not up to the finance committee to do anything with this, but it still is a finance issue because it directly impacts what we're able to raise and appropriate should 500 abatements go through and limit the amount of funds that we're able to levy to bring into our actual coffers. So at this point, I just wanted to kind of have a generalized conversation. We can't really get into too much detail because, again, there is an investigation going on currently. But I wanted to see if there was anything that anyone on the Finance Committee wanted to discuss specifically around that, whether be it the tax assessments themselves, the assessment process, or the abatement process, or anything as well.
I'll start just that when it first came up, when the select board was sitting here and there was a lot of people out there, I was watching it online, and I knew very little about Proposition 2.5 and how the assessments went and all that. And I'm sure, like many of the people in town, I wanted to learn more. And I went online, did some research. I also went to the next select board meeting, me and 600 of my closest friends, and another 100 or more on Zoom or wherever, and we listened, and I was very proud of the town. I don't live in the lake area, so but I sat next to somebody, a woman who and her husband, and they told me they had their forever home, and she's not sure if they're going to be able to afford to live there if they have to pay the taxes they got to pay, and that hits home, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go. And it was very, people were very emotional about it. I think most people handled it well. I was very proud of the town. They handled it very well. Some people, very few people, didn't handle it as well as I thought they could. But I think the select board did a good job of doing the right thing, of appropriating. I heard on the last one that they appropriated money to do the work, to investigate, to determine what's going on, and get back. I think they said on February 7th they're going to have some information, and then keep on feeding us the information as they get it. I think that's the best we can do. I think hopefully, I know this isn't going to make anybody happy who have these things, but there's a process in place. This is really, from what I can gather, run by the state. The state basically doesn't give towns a lot of leeway to do these things. The select board doesn't have any authority on assessments, and so hopefully we'll go through the process, do the right things, and get through this. As we just got through the ice storm, we'll get through this too. We had the, I think, and I'm very interested to see what's going to happen, because this is a very important thing for a lot of people in town, and I hope it has a good outcome.
Agreed. This will actually come up a little bit in the next section. While I was at the trade show, the MMA trade show, I attended a meeting on economic and fiscal outlooks. And there was a chief of the Bureau of Local Assessors there, Chris Wilcock, that I actually pulled aside and spoke to for a good half an hour about this exact situation. And Tom, you're exactly right. It's heavily mandated by the state. They put out exactly what the calculations are, how to do them. And the process is exactly as what's happened on social media. It's file an abatement. It is get yourself, at least get a stop in the process filed by February 1st. The idea being that after 3 months, if you don't hear anything back, your abatement request is officially denied. I don't know if anybody knows that as well. That was a new one that I hadn't heard specifically, and the purpose of that is so that you can, the purpose there is that you can actually specifically file a request for appeal, so that way it has to be looked at the state level as well.
There is it was mentioned at the last, at the big meeting at the town hall, it was mentioned that at the high school, it was mentioned that, and then they also said, and I heard at the last meeting, that they are going to hire additional. Part of the money is not only for the investigation, but the additional resources to get through all the abatements. Mm-hmm. And also, it seems like get the resources, because if people don't like the outcome, they can go to the next level, which is, I think, the state.
Correct.
And we have to be there too, so we're gonna have the resources. I guess that's kind of how the process works. So, and they're gonna use ARPA money, I think that's what it was. So it seems to me like they did the right thing. Everything the select board did and everything that is going through is what we should do. And if we find that there were errors made, let's deal with them and move on.
Agreed. Yeah, from my very minimal knowledge of how this whole process works, it seems to me that the process was followed correctly, but the checks weren't there. That, yes, we certainly did take into account, recent sales. We did take into account market variations and whatnot, and then came out with these new assessments that were then fed into a formula and outspat an increase in land value or property value specifically. And then I think it was Selectman Alonso, who said that it's simple enough to simply just sort a column of increases, and if you see one that says plus 150%, perhaps look into that a little bit more. So I think, at absolute minimum, we need to look into ways that we can make sure that this doesn't happen again, regardless of what the actual outcomes are for abatements and actual taxes that go out. The other kind of points that Mr. Wilcox brought up was, and I reached out to Madam Town Manager earlier today, one was the last adjustment actually made, and effectively we need to have it certified by the state every 5 years is the requirement, and that's just sort of state law, actually literally state law. But if we choose to make assessments in between those times and change land values and whatnot, that's up to the assessors. And I have reached out to the assessors. I haven't heard back from them to see sort of when we last did assessments and to see how often we're doing them. On the DLS website, you have this wonderful feature called the Municipal Finance Trend Dashboard, which allows you to do a very granular look into each town, any of the 351 towns, communities in the Commonwealth, and actually look at the historical values, look at the average price, average property value, the average taxes on each community. And I went and looked and just did a quick little Excel comparison to see how did they change between sort of the state versus Lunenburg themselves. And the only thing that I find that stands out, I mean, we kind of follow, it probably would be easier if I simply just shared it. There it is. So simply, this is looking 2018 to 2023. This is the percent change of the assessed value, so just in the property values. State is orange and Lunenburg specifically is yellow. We trend pretty much relatively similar to the state until 2022 when the state jumps by 24%. And we kind of stay on our average of about 7%. The following year, 2023, the state's increases back down to its normal, and we're way up at 26% of an increase. So I'm hopeful that the select board will kind of look into that as well, since I'm sure that's going to be representative of part of the change that we've seen. Since our property values went up 26%, 3 times higher than it has been historically rising. The other portion was in the, this should be changed, I apologize. That's not the assessed value change. That is the average price, average tax per single household change. So again, small incremental changes, increases over the years, but stayed relatively similar. 2022, the state goes up by 5%. We go up our average. 2023, the state actually dropped in the amount of tax that it actually charges on the whole, and we jump up 7%. And I have a feeling that a large percentage of that is actually coming from those communities in and around the lakes. So there's much more to be gleaned, I'm sure, from this. And anyone that is watching this, I highly recommend going to the DLS website on mass.gov. There is a ton of information that you can dig through. You can spend, I spent 2 hours when I probably should have been working putting these together, but there's plenty of data to look through. And the DLS members were actually very willing to talk to members of the community as well, so they said to reach out to them for sure. They were a little bit candid, I think, as well, since I suppose it is their job. One of the questions that was asked was, would you sell your house for the current value that it's at? And I think that's a little bit, while it's a reasonable question, I think it's a very sort of heartless question of the situation. I don't entirely agree with the sentiment. But from, I suppose, from the standpoint of simply the fact of the matter is we did see a large increase in property values, regardless of how the properties were assessed. I'm sure everyone who went on Zillow over the last 2 years saw that their properties did increase. And it's not lost on me that 150% increase is not at all reasonable in the slightest bit. But I think that there is a reasonable amount that should be expected. And I look forward to seeing what the select board finds. I look forward to seeing what the assessors come out with. That's pretty much what I had from the MMA conference and talking with Mr. Wilcox about that. Any other comments about the whole situation?
So what is the next piece of information we'll get and when? And is this a kind of a summary of what happened? Is that what's the next, what's the report that's being worked on?
The select board basically said on Tuesday that they were going to come out. It's going to be kept, the data that they're getting is going to be kept private because it could be, who knows what it's going to say. But they're going to give out until the report, but they're going to give updates on a regular basis. I think February 7th was the first update on what's happening so that everybody knows what's going on. I think that, and I also think once the abatements start to happen and people start going in, they're obviously going to come back out when it's done. And I'm not sure how it works if they hear, yes, you got it, or no, you didn't, or whatever. We'll hear about that too. So I think things will come out. But it's one of the selectmen asked how long it's going to take, and it was talked about, May before they get, it wasn't clear, but May before they get a final answer on this investigation.
So I suppose that asks the question, or begs the question of how does that affect town meetings? At least in terms of a warrant for town meeting to raise and appropriate, I guess. How would we handle that at town meeting? If we still have an ongoing investigation, abatement still pending, are we able to actually function the way we should at town meeting?
So the overlay, we would, just like snow and ice, it would be something have to be appropriated at town meeting for that amount. So
That would be the only thing that would be affected at this point?
at this point,
Okay.
well, besides the other things that are, depending on the amount that's needed for the overlay, there's obviously impact to any of those uses. So the extent at this time right now is not known.
Okay.
So what is the potential financial impact? Do we have a,
To increase our overlay account by the amount that would be eligible for abatements.
okay,
because I think you said like 116 was in the first draw of the thing, but it's gonna have to be bigger probably.
Our total, all our overlay, every year that's, money is appropriated towards the overlay account. It's one account essentially. They changed that law years ago. It used to be individual years, but now all the years are combined. So in all, I think it was 280,000 or 290,000 that we have in the overlay account.
Do we have any idea at this point how many abatements we've actually received? Or is that a question for do they go to the assessors or do they go to the town?
They go to the assessors.
Okay, so we'd have to ask the assessors, I assume.
By next Wednesday, we'll know total.
Okay.
They're
So-
due by
so-
February 1st.
Would you mind, I don't understand the overlay account. Could you explain that?
So the overlay count includes an allowance for abatements. So as the applications are processed by the Board of Assessors, they're reviewed of whether they'll grant an abatement in whatever the amount may be in taxes. So for each application, there would be, if approved, an amount associated with that application. So we need to carry that amount in the overlay.
So that amount would be, if someone got an abatement for, I don't know, $5,000 or $1,000.
Then we'd need to carry that $1,000 because we'd have, and any associated interest possibly with that for the abatement, the credit towards that.
Okay. Is there specific criteria for an abatement?
The, as far as,
Just are there strict rules about what abatements get granted or not, or is it, just judgment?
it's based on information such as properties of similar, if you can show a property of similar comparison value, or incorrect information in the property record card. Those are all things that I think are on their form, which you can
Okay.
find on the website.
Okay.
At this point, are you concerned about our overlay account at all?
I need to know the full scope of what
Okay. So if we don't know potentially until, well, I suppose if the abatements are still being worked through, if we get, I've heard numbers like 500, who knows? But if the assessors are still working through a number of abatements through town meeting, is there a cutoff that we say, again, I wonder how the overlay would work at that point if we're still processing active abatements that we would have to carry it over.
I think as information comes out, we'll do these updates at the Board of Selectmen's meeting. That's, I think, where,
Okay, so we'll have a better picture once we've started the process, I suppose.
yeah, I don't have that information right now, so
Okay.
I can't provide it.
Okay, yeah, my concern is not so much of what happens this week or next week, it's more what happens when we get to April and we have to vote on things, and will we have a full picture of everything we need to know as a town to make an informed vote? Or will we even be able to vote at that point if we still have things open? I don't know what the law would say about that. And I'm sure these are things that Mr. Jeffries will contend with.
Okay.
Can I just check my understanding? And assuming everything was calculated correctly, at least the way I'm processing this, and please just tell me if I'm off base here. During, obviously the COVID timeframe, property values changed dramatically, and from what I am understanding from the meetings and from what's been written, et cetera, that lakefront properties potentially, the relative value of those have gone up pretty dramatically compared to the other, property in town, and that's driving this difference in evaluations and ultimately in taxes. Is that essentially what's happening?
Again, I can't answer anything until we do, more investigating into the whole process and the valuations.
Okay.
I think the term is, the phrasing is, I cannot comment on an ongoing investigation.
Should have your lawyer there, you can cover the thing, and,
Like the
no, it
chairman
is
said.
a very difficult time, and I feel for not only for you and for the assessors and all the people, it's not a good thing to go through, and hopefully when we go through this, we'll figure out why it happened and do the right thing. But it's not an easy time for everybody, for the taxpayers, especially on the lake, and for the people who were, directly involved. It's a tough time.
Yeah, I agree. Tom, I think from what I've heard, and obviously I'm not one of the assessors and I'm not one of the people that were affected by it either, is that it was more the land values that were increased specifically,
Yeah.
apart from the building values.
Yeah, the land values I've had 40 years of banking, and I read 10,000 residential appraisals in my life, so it's a fudge figure. House sells for 500,000 because somebody wants to buy it for 500,000. Well, if this house was over here, it'd only be worth 300. Well, the land's over here is worth 100, so that means this land's worth 200.
Mm-hmm. In my 40 years, I usually talking with customers on the other side, my house should be worth more. Never my house should be worth less. So I'm used to the other arguments, but it's not an easy thing to do, and it's also, I don't know how many times an appraiser will say, well, I'm waiting for this house to sell so I can use this comp, because you can't use the comparable sales until the house actually is bought and closed and, it's all transferred. But once you get that, then you can put it in the appraisal and the value can go up or down, up obviously in the case of banking, but, a couple houses selling can change the market of all the properties. That's just the way it is. And I think, I heard a lot of discussion about, well, only 9 or 14, I can't remember what the number was. Well, that's on the lakes in the last year or so, in 2021. That's a bunch of properties. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know what's going to come out, but I'm very interested to see how this all works out, because I hope it works out well for everybody. But the one thing for the people listening, that the town is not getting extra money. It's only 2.5% increase from what we got last year. It's just the way it's being divided up. And so the school isn't going to have a windfall, or the, big tax, big pay increases for everybody because we're loaded with money. It's just that. Mm-hmm. It's just it's just a little bit of money. And if we don't get the money from, and people have the right to have an abatement, and if we don't get it, then we'll deal with it. But that's just less money the town will have, which is not a good thing, but it's going to be a thing, and we'll have to deal with it when it comes up. Yeah, the way that's maintained is the tax rate per thousand, which last year I believe was like $17.19 for everyone, and this year is $14.62. So clearly everyone's property's gone up. But, we could be as bad as Cape and the Islands that pay $3 per thousand. It's property value, but you're right. It's, had the houses, the 9 houses that sold around the lakes been, appraised at $200,000 instead of $1.5 million, or I'm throwing numbers out there, then it would drastically change the percentage increases that everyone else would be dealing with. So I think it's good as well that I believe they agreed to do a 3-year average. Is that correct, Madam Town Manager? Instead of the 9 or 14 or whatever properties they agreed to do, to look at a 3-year average of sales? 2-year average of sales? Okay. So I'm hopeful that will help as well, at least in the interim,
Yeah.
while the abatements are still being run.
Well, I think the state actually has a percentage that, I think this, the assessor said like 3% was statistically viable, and for 2021, it was 2 point something, so it was less, so we had to use 2020. So, I mean, it's a very complicated process, but it seems like the state, because of how it does it, as you saw, it has a lot of controls. So there's, the town can't do a lot to, as far as messing it up, I think. I think that's the state probably goes, we don't want 351 towns to do it differently. We want them to all do it the same.
Right.
Which is interesting that a couple of people said that this is the only town that they've heard of this happening. I don't know if there's other towns that have had similar problems where this side of the town is getting, a vast increase and this side isn't.
For what it's, I mean, take it for what it's worth, but according to Mr. Wilcox, it has happened in the past in other communities. It's just this year it's Lunenburg. Whether that's
Yay.
accurate or
Yay
not,
for us.
exactly. Or whether that's accurate, who knows? My big concern, though, is that, as you said, these numbers are based on 2021 values. Our market didn't start peaking until just recently. So next year's taxes I am slightly concerned with as well. So hopefully we figured this out before then, so we don't run into the same issue in a different part of town or in the same part of town or whatnot. But I think regardless of what is happening here, and I think the absolute necessity is to, if you have any concerns whatsoever, is to file that abatement and make sure it's in, and make sure you have a copy, a stamped copy saying that it's been received before February 1st. Because after February 1st, you're stuck with the bill, regardless of what happens.
I was very proud of the town. They got space over at United Parish, Andrew Hall. And I didn't go, but I saw a bunch of people there, and they were working on it, and it was, I mean, when bad things happen, sometimes the community comes together, and that was an example of something, and I was very proud of the town that they handled it that way.
Agreed. And if anybody as well is looking for help on that, hop on social media. There are about 10 people that are offering their services. I know there are realtors offering to do fair market comparisons and whatnot as well. And also people offering to help out how to fill out the forms properly so there isn't an issue. There's lots of resources at this point.
And there's still some time left.
It's true. A couple days. Any other topics, conversations, comments, anything? All right. Well, again, I wish everyone that this has affected the best of luck, and the town as well. I know it's going to be difficult for everyone, but I'm sure we will be able to push through it at some point, whether it's an ice storm, as Tom said, or taxes going up on the lakes. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point.
I saw somebody on Facebook when we were going through the power outage goes, at least we're not talking about real estate taxes now.
All right, so the big part of the trade show update, I went to the Massachusetts Municipal Association's trade show over the last weekend in Boston. It was quite enjoyable, honestly. And the biggest takeaway for at least this committee is that economic and fiscal outlook, which I'm in the process of writing up a little document to send out to the committee. And I'll pass that around. That has a little bit more detail than this, but effectively it sort of came down to a couple big points that Governor Healy spoke and talked about her budget, which, as we know, is due out by March 1st. Her intention, though, is to have Chapter 70 numbers submitted to towns prior to that, so people can at least get an idea. So for our school committee members, with any luck, we'll have numbers before March 1st to work off of. Her big charges were that she wants to go for housing and economic development in the state, how that affects us. It's tough to say for sure. I'm sure that's more of a city than a municipality. But she also did file for a 2-year bond for some Chapter 90 funding as well to work on some state roads. So that may trickle down to us depending upon if that gets voted through the legislature or not.
Did you say anything about the millionaire's tax that was just passed? Nothing,
Not a word.
not a word. That's supposed to be going to schools and infrastructure? I can't remember what the two things were.
It's possible. No, she was more sort of forward-looking to what her plan was for the budget coming up. She wants to fully fund the circuit breaker program. She wants to fully fund, what was the other one? Yeah, fully fund the circuit breaker. She's aware of a discrepancy between Chapter 70 funding for small versus large communities, and she's wanting to address that as well. Apparently, they're going to be putting out a rural and small community report, which has a very granular look at sort of everything that they can surrounding funding and cherry sheet offsets and all of that stuff. I have not heard as to when that's coming out, but that's on the plan. Apparently, there's a Mass Municipal Data Hub that's getting put together, and they're going to have a soft release, ideally in the early, or I guess late winter, to get a little bit more information and get more data out there for people to look into. There were a few changes to, I guess they weren't necessarily, I guess there were a few small changes to Mass General Law that they highlighted, and most of that was just a difference in how, and again, it's great the way the school committee here, it was basically just a slight difference in how funding could be used for school supplies specifically, and the idea basically was just they were reorganizing the appropriate and then order and then pay, as opposed to appropriate, pay, and then order. So you don't have to have the money, and I think it's mostly software-based. Nothing too big, but it was good. The other topics I went to was a PFAS conversation, which that's not something we need to discuss at all at this point, but I'll send it out as well. And then DEI was the closing ceremony. But I strongly recommend taking a look at some of the presentations. They're going to be made available on the MMA website in the next month or so. And they have at least their slides up, and there's a decent number of links in there, especially the DLS and the DOR parts of mass.gov should be very useful. There will be, I believe, a Finance Committee specific one coming up I haven't seen it posted yet. Madam Town Manager, did you say that there's an MMA Finance Committee specifically coming up in the early spring, I believe, correct? Not yet. At least as of late last week it wasn't, or early this week it wasn't on there. But there will be, it's supposed to be planned that there will be a Finance Committee specific one that I would encourage members to at least, I believe it may be remote, so it would be good for members to join and
There was one a couple days ago.
that
There
was a webinar.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. I did, it was pretty helpful. They had a good walkthrough of a lot of the tools that they have
Yeah.
on their website.
On
so
the
that was
DLS
good.
Hub, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of a preview of it, but apparently there will be a more in-depth actual meeting that takes place. So as soon as I find out about that, I'll certainly put that forward.
I got they sent you over a thing, and then they sent you over, you could actually watch it again. I wonder if anybody wants to see it, I can send it to them.
It might be on their YouTube page.
Oh, maybe, I don't know,
I don't know.
I looked at my email the other day and go, oh, I have to grade them. All that power.
So moving on to minutes. Have people had a chance to look over our January 12th minutes? Are there any issues that anyone has that came up?
No.
Okay.
I couldn't find them.
They should be I checked earlier today. They are in our minutes and agendas to be approved. I'll just double check real quick.
Yeah, I see them.
Minutes and review.
I couldn't even,
I can send them to you separately if you'd like to take a
Okay.
look at them.
yeah, I couldn't find the usual FinCom folders that I usually find if they're in.
Okay. All right, well, let's see if we can take care of that part offline. If you're still having trouble getting into it, that's something we can reach out to. I think Chris set it up, so we can talk to him or
Okay.
our IT people as well. The three of you did have a chance to read it through, though? Okay. I would entertain a motion then if anyone would like to put one forward.
I move that we approve the minutes from January 12th.
Second?
All right, any discussion? All right, roll call vote. Mr. Simeoni?
I'll abstain because I haven't looked at them.
Sure. Mr. Nizzolo?
Aye.
Mr. Baelish?
Aye.
Mr. Gray?
Aye.
And an aye from myself. We are approving the minutes 4-0 to 1 abstention. We'll take care of moving those over. Committee reports. Anything specific happening for you, Mr. Baelish?
I don't know.
Okay. Anything new with Green Communities or Municipal Building? Or land use?
We're meeting for the municipal building committee on the 6th. We had a meeting just before our last finance committee, and I talked about it then, but we're going over things like, if we do this kind of work on this building, is that going to hit codes that we're going to have to go in and put an elevator in the building and things like that, so that we can have a better idea of, if we can only do certain things without hitting a certain thing, and that's going to cost us $10 million, we will avoid doing those things. So, so we're getting down to the more granular stuff, but still a lot of discussion to be had before we can come back and give people a good idea of what we're going to suggest.
Excellent. Anything on DPW or sewer, Mr. Simeoni?
The sewer commission met on the 12th. I had started watching the video on it. It was just discussion about the business manager retirement and job posting. That was as far as I got with that.
Okay. Board of Health has not met at all since our last meeting. Capital plan is effectively done and was presented on this evening, so that one's all set. And I have not heard anything on the Council on Aging or anything. School committee.
Yeah, so I did attend the school committee meeting on January 18th. It was my first meeting, so there's probably nothing I could really report that's very useful, especially with 2 members of the school committee in the audience. But there was a brief conversation regarding next year's budget, and one of the key points is advocating for new staff positions. So conversations are ongoing from what I'm aware, and there's going to be a Q&A at the next meeting. So there'll probably be more information coming out of that on February 1st.
Excellent. Anything else either school board member would like to add since you're here? Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Any specific ideas for future meetings coming up? I know we have one meeting before budget season officially kicks off. Is there anything anyone's desperate to talk about in addition to our normal stuff? Perfect. If anything comes up, just give me an email and we'll throw it on the agenda. Any public comment in closing from the committee?
No.
Any public comment from the public? Come on up.
Pleasant Street. Stipulate for this that I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, and not intending to represent any positions of any other committees or people. So tonight's presentation on the capital plan, first of all, I have to say, I think this budget season is probably going to be the weirdest one that any member of the sitting committee has had yet. We had a pretty weird one in 2020, but I think the only sitting member from that year is Jay. This is going to be a weird one. And I think the reason why it's going to be a weird one is the governor's budget's coming out late. we got so many unknowns with respect to this most recent crisis, and a lot of misunderstanding, quite frankly, on the part of the public and members of boards like ours, just in terms of what the potential ramifications are. I know nothing more than anybody else does about assessments. It's a bit of a mystery to me. I understand Prop 2.5. I understand overlays. I understand how this year's budget relates to next to a certain degree. But I would encourage you to press on the town manager for deeper explanation of all of those topics, because I think that people know how this issue is affecting individual homeowners. I don't think people have any concept of how this issue is going to affect everybody in Lunenburg with respect to the money that we can spend on capital relating to facilities and infrastructure and vehicles and equipment, and potentially the broader budget, depending upon how extensive this issue really is. The concern that I have is that everything is going to get pushed until the last minute and then not get adequate conversation and oversight. I'm sympathetic to the position that the town manager is in. I understand that it's not her MO to speculate, first of all, as I've learned, working with her for many years, or for a few years anyway. But I think that the questions that I would advise you to ask have to do with scenarios. So what are the scenarios if, the total abatements are trending for X number of dollars? Because the conversations that were had by the members of the school committee and by the capital plan absolutely did not even speculate that this crisis would come about. We were not looking at averages of free cash going into capital plan over the last 5 years. We were looking at trends over the last 3 or 4 years, and that number was a lot greater in terms of what we were anticipating for free cash funding to the capital plan. We were having conversations like, where would the line be drawn, and could we potentially fund everything? We were looking at, potentially $500,000 from the special purpose stabilization account to fund the ambulance, because that's really how the special purpose stabilization account has been described for the last several years, is specifically for large vehicles like fire trucks and ambulances. But having sufficient free cash to fund almost everything else. And there's some really important stuff on that capital plan that it's not going to be great if we can't find a way to fund them. And it's not just a fire alarm. There's a lot of other things on that capital plan, specific to the school department, but really for every other department that are kind of critical. Lastly, I want to just ask that that you take the time, perhaps in a finance committee meeting, for the benefit of the people in town, to give a visual presentation or representation in terms of what Proposition 2.5 really is, what its effect is on the total levy, and how that effect is now bearing out because of what's happening with the current crisis around assessments. Because you spoke to earlier, or I think you spoke to, Mr. Gray, this perception that with taxes going way the heck up, we can afford to do all these other things. Well, that's absolutely not the case at all. In fact, it's the polar opposite when you consider the effect that abatements are going to have. So anyway, look forward to speaking with you over the course of the next several months and finding a way through this. But I just want to emphasize again, I think that we have to be able to discuss scenarios that may not come to pass, but just get that discussion out there so that when money becomes available, or doesn't become available, or we have to look at other sources, to include ARPA, by the way, that is a conversation that really needs to occur, that everybody has a sufficient amount of information to make informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment from the public? All right, hearing none. Upcoming meetings, like I said, we have one last meeting before budget season kicks off, February 9th. February 16th will be the town manager's budget presentation. I will not be able to be at that meeting, but Chris Menard will be running it, and I will certainly be watching it after the fact. After that, we start into the weekly meetings. February 23rd, Council on Aging, Land Use and Library, and then it goes on from there. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Any discussion? Fantastic. Mr. Simeoni?
Aye.
Mr. Nizzolo?
Aye.
Mr. Baelish?
Aye.
Mr. Gray? Aye. Aye from myself. At 8:20 PM, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night, gentlemen.
Night.
Thanks.